evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming to this Great Disputation. The topic tonight appears to be very particularly topical, but it is actually slightly accidental. Last year we decided that we would mark the 300th anniversary of Benjamin Franklin coming to live in the parish and work physically inside this church by holding an American-themed debate. And we couldn't really have picked a better day for it. The debate will predominantly be a debate between the three guest speakers on either side, but there is the opportunity for you to be involved in the debate in two ways. The first is to intervene in the debate. If a speaker says something that you would like to challenge, feel free to challenge, stand up and say on that point. They don't have to accept it, and if they don't, please sit down, but you can engage in that way. The second is between the fourth and the fifth speakers, there will be the opportunity for a few floor speeches where people will be invited by Sir Brian Leveson to speak at that sort of lectern in the middle. So he will invite you in turns, sort of pro and against, to speak, and please do restrict yourself to the side that you actually intend to speak for, or it will be very annoying. May I just read out the rules of debate? 1. There will be an indicative vote at the beginning of the debate to give an idea of how the mood of the House has changed over the course of the debate. Each of the guest speakers will have 10 minutes to present their case, with the exception of the first speaker, who will introduce the other speakers first. They should be heard respectfully, but please do cheer, boo, shout hear, hear, or engage loudly. Vocal reactions, I'd already written that down. Vocal reactions to the speeches are encouraged, but attempts to prevent a speaker from continuing are discourteous, will be ruled out of order, and may result in your being asked to leave the building. Members of the audience may intervene in the speech of a guest speaker by standing in their place and shouting either on a point of information or on that point. Please do. Everybody did in the first debate and nobody did last time. So let's go back to the first time round. It is entirely up to the guest speaker whether to accept an intervention or not. If they choose not to do so, please sit down immediately so as not to disrupt the debate. An intervention is not a speech but a question. Attempts to turn this into a speech will be ruled out of order immediately, and you will be asked to take your seat without further intervention. Interventions and any direct reply to those interventions do not count towards the time limit of the speeches. Floor speeches are given from the podium in the middle of the church. Floor speakers have 3 minutes to speak and will be given a 30-second warning to end their speech, really by me waving my hand at you. Whenever the bell is rung, whoever is speaking must stop and their microphone will be cut off at that point. At the end of the debate, there will be a fully counted vote by raising hands. Tellers will count specific segments of the room and tally the results. These will then be formally presented to the speaker. And I'm delighted that Sir Brian Leveson has agreed to act as speaker this evening, and I now hand over to him to start the debate.
It is a great privilege to be able to be here today to be involved in this disputation starting in 1133, but I must admit first that I am not the Bishop of London, who normally is the speaker at these debates. Neither am I Lord Leveson, although I am extremely gratified that those who have prepared the paper before you have promoted me to that distinguished office. My name is Brian Leveson, and I am very pleased to be here to be given the authority to stop people talking, which as a judge was always very difficult to achieve. To gain an idea of the mind of the House and how it might change over the course of this disputation, we will hold a quick indicative vote now by hands. The question to be debated is that this House believes that America is still a shining city on a hill. If you are of that mind, please now show your hand. Now, somebody ought to count that. Indicative, very good. If you're opposed to this position, now please show your hand. Oh. The work then falls to those who propose the proposition. If you're unsure, please raise your hand. Not many. So it is with great pleasure that I now invite James Price to open the case for the proposition.
My Lords, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Father Marcus, thank you for asking me with at least 48 hours' notice to step into this. What must, I think, given recent controversies in the past week, now be the preeminent debating chamber in the country. I'm only sorry that for those of you who saw some of the news out of Oxford that I'm not wearing the traditional Oxford Union garb. No, not white tie anymore, but tracksuit bottoms and slippers and a sullen scowl, for those of you who've seen that story. It falls upon me, as has been said, to introduce all of your speakers before we get going this evening. And we have a formidable roster of people sitting here in opposition. First of all, we have the veteran journalist Peter Oborne, who once caused a little controversy ahead of the 2004 US presidential election. I'm going to try and quote you exactly here, sir. Using this election was done using the darkest tools of political persuasion, fear, lies, and black propaganda in order to target an amazingly small but utterly decisive group of largely ignorant voters. So, Mr. Oborne, thank you for giving me my strategy this evening. And next up, we have Anne Pettifor, an esteemed economist and author, who, on her Substack recently, earlier this year, likened the misplaced confidence in the American economy, specifically in the dollar and the invisible hand in general, to the hubris of the feast of Belshazzar. So I only hope that the writing is not on the wall for our side. That's a joke for the priests there in this debate. And closing the opposition is Peter Hitchens, another stalwart of the British press, described by a friend of mine as the last great Englishman, who himself also once wrote of America, and I'll get you right as well here, sir. It is an exhilarating and beautiful place, wrongly sneered at by too many British people who simply haven't experienced enough of it to know how good it can be and how much worse off we would all be if it weren't there. This is such a good description of the shining city that I'm almost tempted to sit down now. We also have, to close off the debate, the Lord Hannan, a man who I often think is too good a public speaker. No pressure this evening, Dan. Certainly too good a speaker for the House of Commons, and a man who, in my final Oxford Union debate, debating, I think, against you, Mr. Secretary, for this evening, wore a full Puritan's outfit. So I only hope you're not expecting to meet John Winthrop this evening. And between the Lord Hannan and I, we have Dame Karen Pierce, the much-missed and fantastic former ambassador from the Court of St. James to the United States of America. Now, there's no glib Peter Madison joke here that I'll bother to do that Dame Karen won't have heard. So instead, I'll just recall when I was lucky enough to meet Dame Karen a few years ago, when one of the many chancellors that we had recent years, and I went over to the US for a work trip, and Dame Karen got us into the White House, where we had a series of meetings, and meeting Kamala Harris, of all people, the then Vice President. Now, meeting Ms. Harris may not be a life-changing experience for everybody, but it was for me. Because after doing this, I managed to include on a dating app profile that I had met Kamala Harris, and I expected that this would endear me to the sort of slightly leftist ladies of London. Instead, I had a message from a blonde Republican bombshell who lives in London saying, "I can't stand that woman. I hope you bulldozed her." Well, several years later, Ali and I have been married, and so, Dame Karen, thank you. You have been responsible for more than one special relationship. No. These are your speakers, and I know that the original Bartholomew Fair was eventually shut down through its propensity to vice, but with speakers like this, it will only be virtue you'll be hearing this evening, and these are your speakers, and they are most welcome. So. So as we saw from that indicative vote, in proving that America is still a shining city on a hill, it will be something of an uphill struggle, but we will do our best. It is a wonderful phrase. I think it comes originally from the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus, and if I was quoting you two gentlemen right, I'll endeavor to quote the Lord right as well, when he said that ye are the light of the world, a city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. I think that comes from Matthew 4:15, but that wonderful... 5:14, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, BibleGateway.com, an amazing American invention, has been blocked thanks to British and European Ludditism. So I had to rely on another great American invention of ChatGPT to prove this. If you can think of anywhere else I could find a Bible, please do let me know. And it was quoted, as we just mentioned, by Dan Hannan's cosplaying hero, John Winthrop, that great Puritan leader on the good ship Arbella, a Puritan ship that crossed over to Massachusetts for a new life. And the present participle, the shining, was added mercifully not by Stephen King, but by the Gipper, by Ronald Reagan in many of his speeches. And I think that a shining city, needs to be set on firm foundations. And those firm foundations, actually, in anticipation of you giving me 2 days' notice to do this, last month, actually, Ali and I visited John Winthrop's grave in Boston, Massachusetts, as part of the Treason Trail, the Freedom Trail, that they have in that city. And although that we Brits are often the bad guys along that trail, it is, of course, set up our actors for steady work as bad guys in every Hollywood movie. But also along that trail, there is a church, the Old North Church. And those of you who will know this story of Paul Revere's Midnight Ride, 1 by land, 2 by sea, will know that story. But you will also, when we went to this church, there was a picture of Her Late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, who expressed her joy and surprise at a British monarch being invited to that church on the 200th anniversary of America's founding, and talked about those strong bonds of fellowship and of deep, abiding connections that go much beyond politics and beyond the military and beyond the economy and all these things. And I feel that special relationship, maybe I'm biased, as a true Brit, that Britain has that special connection with the United States. But every country has some unique, dare I say, special relationship with the United States. It is the sine qua non of countries around the world. I think there are a lot of reasons for this. And whether it's people, as Obama once said, in palaces and parliaments, or huddled around radios in the forgotten corner of the world, America has that special place in the heart of almost every nation. Not always living up to those ideals, but it stands there as an ideal nonetheless. And I think the few reasons for that. American elections still matter. They really matter, for good or ill. Unlike perhaps here, and certainly unlike in lots of other countries, those elections matter. And because they matter, America can change. It can improve. It can become, in their own words, a more perfect union. And in so doing, it can inspire other nations in those changes as well. 200-odd years ago, it was Pitt the Younger who said that England had saved herself by her energies, and I trust shall save Europe by her example. That mantle, I think, has been moved on to the United States. And whether you think that's on climate action, or whether you think it's on smashing up the deep state, or whether you think it's on international regulatory rules, or whether you think it's on closing up borders, it can inspire others because it can change. Another reason it can do this is because of the dynamism of its economy. Ronald Reagan talked about that shining city on the hill having free and open ports and commerce and creativity, and the kind of dynamism of the American economy that has built the modern world and drives it. I mean, for goodness sake, they are catching 40-foot-high skyscraper-sized spaceships out of the air with Mechazilla arms so that they can build another shining city on the moon, so that they can build another shining city on Mars. That's pretty damn impressive to me. Sorry, I shouldn't have said damn in here, Father. And I also think that this is true of the American people. Now, again, I may be a little biased and get it in the neck at home if I didn't say this, but I do think that it's important to point out that Americans are so much more than the caricatures that some people want them to be. They are big-hearted. They are endlessly positive. The way they welcomed Her Majesty the Queen in the Old North Church, the way they welcome us all today, the strength of that special relationship with us, but with others around the world. They are so positive in hoping and believing in a better tomorrow. And I think it should inspire all of us old cynical Brits here to believe in that too. I get to wake up next to that every day, and I think that many other people get a smaller taste of that as well by that warmth and positivity of the American people. But please, sir. No, it's a very good point, but I think that polarization, when you go and talk to the people on the ground, when you get down to the nub of it, they realize that they are not red states and blue states, but they are still the United States. There is a lot more that combines and unites them than separates them, and I do think that it is, at least in part, external forces pushing this, but that kind of polarization is not unique to the United States. And I do think that whilst it may have been caused in large part from perhaps in its recent incarnation, university campus culture and American social media platforms, it will be America through the tragic events of last week and through other actions there that will inspire a coming together that will, I think, carry itself across the pond as well. Just as when the Americans sneeze, the rest of the world catches a cold, I think we will be able to learn from their ability to heal themselves and knit that social fabric back together and take it over here as well. It's a good point, but I don't think it shatters the strong foundations of the shining city. I do want to address, finally, though, the orange elephant in the room. And I know that my learned colleague, Lord Hannan, will later point out that you don't need to support Trump, obviously, to support this motion. But I thought that despite the British government failing to get the steel tariffs sorted out on this trip, I will try and steel man the orange man. For a moment, right? Far from a perfect vehicle he is in any way, and I would much rather be using my hero Teddy Roosevelt or someone like that to defend the United States. But anybody who, after being shot at, will jump up again and roar in defiance and shout fight and inspire people like that, there is a level of impressiveness to him in like Rocky Balboa being knocked down and always getting back up again that I can't help but be inspired by. And I know that you may feel that the shining city has had a shine taken off of it by his presidency, by the awful scenes in January the 6th, and all the rest of it. But after that bullet so nearly ended his life, I think there was a subtle change, and as we're standing in a church, I'll go with this, a subtle change in the president, where talking to people, it seems that having been a lifelong ignorer of religion, seems to think that he may have been spared for a reason. And I will quote him directly in writing in, or calling in, I should say, to a radio station, where he says in his efforts to try and end the various wars going on around the world, and today I think we've made even more progress in him realizing what he has to do with one particular war, he said, I'll spare you the impression here, I want to try and get to heaven if possible. I hear I'm not doing well. I'm really at the bottom of the totem pole. Self-awareness and self-reflection from Donald Trump. If that's not, please. In this lovely vaulting area, infused with American optimism, I'm going to say that it's real. I don't think that someone can be shot at with that success and not be sufficiently changed by it. His efforts to end all of these various conflicts springing up around the world, the one between Armenia and Azerbaijan and between India and Pakistan and so on and so forth, I think is genuinely impressive. And if that God-sent responsibility to try and save the United States in his own mind can make a redeemed man, can give redemption to even such an inveterate sinner as Donald Trump, it must surely be a wonderful shining city indeed. And so I dare say you will hear a few negative things about the Orange Man from the opposition this evening. You'll hear some other criticisms of the United States as well. Some will be valid, most will be valid, more than valid. You may not like their economic system that creates inequality. You may not like the disastrous foreign military escapades or espionage or any other elements that are perfectly legitimate criticisms of the United States as they are of all other countries. But I want you, every time you're tempted by the siren song from the opposition, to think about, despite having those problems, the shining city still, in the words of Ronald Reagan, will stand strong and true on the granite ridge, her glow steady no matter what storm. And I would put it to you that the United States of America is still that shining city. Its dynamism, its endless ability to renew and restore itself, and thereby to renew and restore the world, its frontier spirit, its belief in the future and in innovation and invention, and its decent and loving and beautiful people. Now, I think she's still that beacon, still that magnet for all those who must have freedom. And in a place where, as I was learning this evening, there is the biggest lady chapel in London to pull pilgrims in, again, to quote Reagan, all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness towards home. Now, with all the difficulties that this world faces, the threat of the Chinese Communist Party, of Islamist militantism, of the silly postmodern wokery that we're seeing, that America is still the last best hope of Earth. It is still that shining city on a hill which cannot be hid. Please vote for us. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me meet my wife. I didn't want to tell you about that beforehand.
I now call upon Mr. Peter Oborne to oppose this motion.
I appeared before Brian Levison in his inquiry about 15 years ago, and he did jolly well. It's a pity you didn't call the second inquiry and make more of a fuss about that when they killed it off, Lord Rep. No, but you should have made more of a fuss. Now, it's lovely to be in this utterly spectacular and wonderful and ancient church. And even lovelier to be in the church where W.G. Grace was a congregant. And I agree with Keir Starmer about very little, but I share his view, which he certainly holds now, that he wishes that Karen Pierce was still the ambassador to the United States. And everybody says that she did a fabulous job. And if he's got any sense, he'll reappoint her. But that's the end of, I'm going to try and be abusive from now on, as much as I... if I'd been standing up and making this argument 35 years ago, I would have argued for the shining city on a hill. And I thought it would be useful just to explain there are two reasons why that's no longer possible. The first one is that until the fall of the Soviet Empire, it absolutely was reasonable to make the case for the very flawed United States. And we all know about Churchill and Roosevelt meeting and creating the Atlantic Charter and everything that stood for, and the whole post-war order on that ship off the Newfoundland coast. And that was so important because it wasn't just that they were then meeting at the height of Nazi horror, but then it went on, of course, and to fight the horror of the Soviet Union. The trouble is now that the United States is absolutely set, and this wasn't just true under the Orange Man, it was also true under Biden, and unfortunately even under Obama, on the destruction of Churchill and Roosevelt's magnificent order, and not joining the great international institutions like the International Criminal Court, the constant war against the United Nations, a tolerance of lawlessness. America has become a rogue state, and it's very tragic. For me, it took a while to realize this, but there's been two stages generally to my political career, journalistic career. And the first stage was spent at Westminster, where I used to go to the United States on the VC-10 with the Prime Minister, meet very cultivated Americans and British diplomats, and it was a decent place up to a point. I then became a foreign correspondent. I traveled the world. I went from country to country, particularly Muslim countries. And you realize that America doesn't mean decency, it means prison cells. It doesn't mean democracy, it means torture. It doesn't mean freedom, it means illegal invasions. I got to know Pakistan very well, where the CIA orchestrated the dislodgement of the rather good civilian administration backed by the Brits, Iskander Mirza, the first president of Pakistan, and his replacement by a dictator. America has never funded civilian governments in Pakistan. It has paid huge sums of money to numerous dictatorships because it is the support of democracy doesn't get further than the Atlantic Ocean, and even then it's been bought by oligarchs. It's so distressing. Iran, we're hearing a lot about Iran. Everything that went wrong, MI6 and the CIA wiped out democratic government in Iran in 1953 so that America's chosen dictator could take over. And that led inexorably, eventually, to the mullahs. And I used to go one country after another. The genocides in Indonesia, the genocides in Guatemala, the atrocious war in Vietnam. America is a barbarous, savage nation, and it is very... Yes, sir? I can't hear the music.
Could you come a bit closer?
I'm going deaf, I'm sorry.
As the honourable gentleman not forgetting that this country has also given several examples of good liberal interventionism?
Well, I'm not even the good ones. I'm trying to think of an example, possibly the Balkans. But I mean, if you look for the last, it just brings me on to the recent liberal interventions, the horror, the disaster of the Iraq War, where we have a British Prime Minister committing the crime of crimes, the crime of aggression, set out in Nuremberg to illegally invade a country and completely mess it up.
Did the Kurds feel like that?
There's always an argument for an invasion, but what Britain and the United States, above all, did to Iraq and the consequences have been so severe and terrible that I think that that remark absolutely reflected the staggering ignorance of the United States, that they, yes, they don't understand. Sorry?
The Kurds stopped getting gas.
No, they stopped getting gas, but you try that. But you tried to. It led to the emergence of ISIS. It led to massacres beyond massacres in Iraq. He's making point anyway. Yeah. And then we had the Afghanistan debacle. We had eventually been driven out of Kabul. A horrifying episode in late American. No, you've had your go, sir. No, I'm sorry. You're very noisy, but I did answer you, and I engaged with you, and I'm moving on. We then had we then have Gaza. And this, we've been brought into this by the United States. The British policy, quite tragically, is never to offend the United States. It values our special relationship so much. Its key point here is not just your orange friend. It was Biden before, that we are engaged in what most good experts regard as a genocide. We are funding a genocide. We are supplying arms to a genocide. Now, we are doing it in order to show support for the United States, but we can't detach ourselves from it. And so the idea, which did exist and did have a small element of reality, although it was always greatly exaggerated, that there was something marvelous about the American presence and the free world, has been shown to the rest of the world. In order to support Israel, we have defied the United Nations. We've trashed the ICJ. The British government is the best court in the world, the most important court in the world, the International Court of Justice. Its rulings, its provisional judgments haven't been supported by us. We have become a rogue state because we need to support. Yes, sir. Sorry, madam. Yeah.
Why has this got anything to do with America?
Sorry, can you come back? Yeah.
Why has this got anything to do with America being or not being the shining city?
Madam, I would remind you of the subject, I think what we're debating about, that America is still a shining city on the hill. Now, as I recollect, that phrase is based on the words of Jesus Christ on the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed be the meek. We're on the side of the powerless. We don't do wrong. That is what Jesus Christ taught. And that cannot define the terrible things we are doing, not just, by the way, in Gaza, but across the globe, because of our alliance with the United States of America, which has lost any connection with the original benign, you might say benign, origins of the nation. But let me just now turn to how much longer have I got, sir? 2 more minutes. I mean, let's look at these pilgrim fathers. They were sectarian bigots. They didn't like the Elizabethan settlements. They were against people having fun. They disapproved of humor. And actually, I think we were lucky to get rid of them. That America was founded on 2 great crimes: genocide and slavery. And if you look at the history of the 19th century, it is a story. America wasn't a nuisance to the rest of the world because it just settled the United States. It drove out the native communities. It destroyed them. It broke treaties. It massacred them. That was why the rest of the globe was able to manage without America, because they were dedicated to the destruction of the native peoples. Once they'd done that, we had their. They noticed that the Spanish Empire was at its final stages in the Philippines, and so they used their techniques learned in the Indian Wars to go and genocide the Moros. That there was a brief moment when, very belatedly, they came to our rescue in the fight against tyranny in World War II. But generally speaking, I cannot argue that it's ever been a shining city on a hill. And nowadays, to everybody, Karen Pierce will know this better than anybody else, to the vast majority in countries in the world, America means barbarism, tyranny, torture, prison cells, and mass murder. And I'm sorry.
If it means that, sir.
They want to go to America to escape the consequences of American
be away from
imperialism in their own countries. I'm afraid. Thank you. Is that it? Yeah.
I now call upon Dame Karen Pearce to speak in favour of the motion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Secretary. This is my favourite topic, so thank you for giving me the opportunity. And what a wonderful place to be having a disputation. The Secretary told me this evening about it is the Lady Chapel is the site of the Virgin Mary's first known visit to the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, the Foreign Office files on the Virgin Mary's state visit have been weeded. But I think it just underscores what a fantastic place and how lucky we are to be here. And Mr. Speaker, if I can begin by a tribute to you, sir. Abraham Lincoln, you may know his story. Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin. He traveled on a horse to the district courts of the Midwest of the United States. And he carried a book in his bag, and it was Blackstone. And for those of you who are not lawyers, Blackstone is, if I may say, the Bible of common law on which America, like the United Kingdom, is founded. And the one great thing about common law is that it believes in freedom. It supports freedom. It believes in things being permissive and not precautionary. And that, if I may submit, ladies and gentlemen, is the great founding principle of both the United Kingdom and the United States of America. We heard from my colleague, the first proponent, how the phrase Shining City came about and how it was used to enormous effect by Ronald Reagan and also, incidentally, by JFK. And for Ronald Reagan, it was one of the great speeches written by the amazing Peggy Noonan, who began as a Democrat but then changed to be a Republican. And when I was in Washington, I had the enormous pleasure of getting to know Peggy. And I asked her about the phrase. And she made a really important point that I would like to stress to you tonight. Peggy pointed out that the essential point about the phrase is that it is not, and it never has been, intended to describe the America of today, whether that is your America of LBJ, who did brilliant things on civil rights and not so brilliant things in other areas, whether it was the America of McCarthyism, the America of Watergate, the America of Iran-Contra. We all know about those, and we have our own versions of them, as do the Japanese, as do the Chinese, as do the Soviet Union, which President Reagan helped to dissolve by his policies. I don't think anyone in this wonderful church thinks that the world today would be better if the Soviet Union had stayed with us. It is a vision. If you do think the world would be better if the Soviet Union had stayed with us, I would be very happy to continue that particular debate outside afterwards. The phrase, yes?
Do you not think that under Vladimir Putin, the Soviet Union and the Soviet ideology is still with us?
Oh no, I love this question. Thank you so much, because it enables me to trot out a line I used in Washington. President Putin is a Russian imperialist. Do not forget that. He brought back the Orthodox Church. He's not a communist. What President Putin actually set out to do with his war in Ukraine is recreate the Russian Empire, and what he got was the Soviet-era economy. But back to the phrase, back to a shining city on a hill. It's a vision of what America can be, as indeed the Bible intended it to be a vision of what society could be. And I've referred to some of the problems with America. The Speaker for the opposition enumerated many of them. You could add the Civil War to that. But I want to take issue with his point about genocide and slavery. Some of you will have seen the Prime Minister's press conference today with President Trump. I think the Prime Minister explained very clearly what our policy towards Gaza is, what the government's policy towards recognition of Palestine is, and what the government's policy towards what Israel, who is, we believe to be a friend of the United Kingdom, but how much and how often government and government ministers, hang on a minute, have condemned what Israel is doing in Gaza. And the Prime Minister set all that out. So we do not blindly follow the United States.
Respond to this. Why, if they condemn it, why do they sell the arms to Israel and provide the military advice and the intelligence advice and the military assistance to a country which they condemn for it, effectively, they wouldn't accept this word, a genocide? Why? So
I will ask the room, if I may, or you, sir, if anyone knows how many licenses the government has suspended to Israel on arms sales.
Just over 30.
And if anyone knows,
320 licenses, they've suspended about 30, leaving 290. And above all, the F-35 fighters.
I'll happily talk about the F-35. It is not possible to distinguish F-35s that go to Israel, and it would mean the loss of a great many jobs in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, and it would mean our abrogating our responsibilities to NATO for the lack of certainty that those particular planes would be going to Israel. So there are equities here, and that is what international affairs and international policy is about. To quote Henry Kissinger, it is not a choice between perfect options. Governments in the US and the UK must do the best they can to protect the country and protect its citizens and support our allies and always strive to do good in the world.
Is doing the best that it can to end the horrible mistreatment of innocent civilians in Gaza. Do you think it is doing the best that it can?
Yes, I do. And if you'd listened to President Trump today, and if you've been a fly on the wall in President Trump's meeting with the Prime Minister, you would have seen some evidence of that. But I'd like to move on, if I may, Mr. Secretary. Whatever the challenges of America today, and they are not unique to America, the challenges of Reagan's time, the challenges of the Massachusetts Bay colony of 1640, the vision of America and what it can be is still shining strong. And I would like to describe at this point George Washington. I don't know how many of you have been to the very small room in the Maryland courthouse in the state capitol building, where George Washington resigned his commission and went back to his farm, like Cincinnatus. That is what America has given the world. At the time, in the Northern Hemisphere alone, there were only 2 republics, and they were very small, in Switzerland and a couple of the smaller Italian states. But George Washington set up a republic, set up democracy, set up the Declaration of Independence, and that goal that America gave, going back to my point about freedom, that is still relevant to a shining city on a hill. And my honourable friend who spoke first set out some of the wonderful things that really underpin American society and the American people. And I think if anyone doubts that, just look at the agreement that was signed today for £250 billion worth of cooperation on technology, a common framework taking the defence relationship for the United Kingdom and the United States to its next level, assuring jobs, assuring Britain remains the 3rd most important country in the world for tech after the US and China.
This is just propaganda. Could you come to the
Is the point that you not just made, is the point you not just made just blatant government propaganda? You're just pushing government messaging. It's nothing to do with the debate.
Well, it's to do with the debate in that it's explaining why we value our relationship with America and why I personally support the proposition. And as I'm a government servant, it's quite hard for me to talk about government policy without supporting it. The point I'm trying to make, sir, is that I could answer all Mr. Oborne's points. He will recall that the Brits were equally culpable in 1953 in Iran. In fact, if you ask an Iranian, they will believe we were more culpable. But it's easier and quicker, given we are limited in time, for me to refer to current day policy. But if you want to have a historical debate dealing with all of Mr. Oborne's points, then I'm very happy to do that afterwards. I will say that the outpouring from America on the death of the Queen was something amazing to behold. We had people queuing for 8 hours outside the embassy, leaving flowers and poems and signing the condolence book. We had the cathedral absolutely full of the Vice President and most of Congress for the memorial service. These are our friends and allies. Well, I'm trying to explain why I support the proposition, and I'm trying to give the audience some evidence of why you should support the proposition, because the things America does are directly relevant to this country, as Mr. Oborne says, but they are by no means the barbarous and tyrannical country that he tried to portray. And in fact, the Queen acknowledged that, to go back to my George Washington theme. When she gave a speech in Philadelphia, she spoke about the American Revolution and the War of Independence, and she said it had taught Britain a very valuable lesson, that we had tried to cling too long to something that could not be kept. And she used it to describe how America and Britain together had gone on to lay the foundations of freedom in the Western world and beyond, that had helped so many countries to thrive. I'm sorry, I've given away an awful lot. I would like to continue, if I may, if you'll allow me. It doesn't matter who is the president of America. It doesn't matter for the purposes of the proposition that America makes mistakes. All countries make mistakes. If you don't think the Soviet Union and China make mistakes, take another look. America is our best protection against autocracy. We cannot do it by ourselves alone. Open societies, open markets are the basis of free societies and help ordinary citizens to thrive. Mr. Oborne referred to Churchill and Roosevelt. That alliance is alive and well and celebrated its 75th anniversary in Washington last year. President Trump has recommitted to that, and you will have seen its effect when the Russian drones went over Poland. So again, without American leadership, without that shining city on the hill, which, please remember, ladies and gentlemen, is an aspiration. It is not a description. It is an aspiration. And my friend who spoke first well laid out why America is a can-do, aspirational society. I do want to leave you with one last point, if I may, which all moves in the same direction of this wonderful, challenging, but fundamentally most important of the United Kingdom's allies. Benjamin Franklin, of whom I'm sure we'll hear more later, in my view, Benjamin Franklin had one big flaw. He thought the national bird of the United States should be the wild turkey. I think the United States and we and the NATO alliance and the cause of freedom are greatly helped by the fact that it's the bald eagle that soars over the shining city. Thank you.
I now call upon Anne Pettifor to speak in opposition of the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair, and may I thank Father Marcus for the privilege of being part of this wonderful debate and with this wonderful community here. And can I also echo what Peter said about the ambassador to Washington, Dame Pierce. I think she did a marvelous job, and I admire her for everything she did and said, and her loyalty to the Labour government, to the current government. I want to begin by saying that I think that the United States is not a city a shining city on the hill. It is actually a tawdry state, and in my view, in a process of failure and a process of collapse. And I deeply mourn that fact, because like many in this room, I grew up thinking the United States was a model for us all to follow. I want to begin by saying that I grew up in South Africa, and I remember as a child watching Sputnik fly across over my parents taking me out into the garden to look at Sputnik, and instilling me with great fear as the threat posed by Russia. We regarded Russia as a powerful empire, and it was an empire. It had imperial interests in Africa, very near to where I grew up. And so it was with absolute astonishment that we witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. Nobody thought that it was possible. Nobody thought it would happen. Much had been done to attack the Soviet Union and to prevent that, but it just collapsed, and within actually a very short period of time. And I believe the United States is heading in that direction. And that is because the Trump administration and and there are many reasons for it, but at the moment, one of the reasons is to do with the Trump administration. The speech, The Shining City on the Hill, is what appears in Ronald Reagan's final speech as President of the United States. And in that speech, he tells a story. He tells a story about the carrier Midway, which was patrolling the South China Sea. And the sailor, like most American servicemen, were young, smart, and fiercely observant. The crew spied on the horizon a leaky little boat, and crammed inside were refugees from Indochina hoping to go to America. The Midway sent a small launch to bring them to the ship and safety. As the refugees made their way through the choppy seas, one spied the sailor on the deck, stood up and yelled out at him, "Hello, American sailor. Hello, freedom man." Today, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, smirks and jokes about shooting fishermen in international waters. That's what's happened to the United States of America. The Trump administration, in collusion with corporate power, has undermined and corrupted the power of key institutions and pillars of a stable state. The once hallowed American Constitution, the judiciary, the rule of law, the democratic power of the Congress and Senate to hold executive power to account, the power of universities and other learned institutions to research and innovate independently around issues like health and climate breakdown. And increasingly, the current administration is undermining the power of the media. It might be Jimmy Kimmel today, but tomorrow is the New York Times and perhaps even Disney. Yes.
Is it your opinion that the current threats to speech in the media in the United States are starker than they were at the time of McCarthy when the Sputnik flew over your house in South Africa?
Yes, I think they are, and I have to agree with you about that. Now, the point about collapse is that it can be abrupt and unforeseen. It took under a century for Rome to go from rule by a single emperor in a fractured, to a fractured chessboard of competing kingdoms, as Luke Kemp argues in his book Goliath's Curse. But it took only a few days last week for the corrupt state of Nepal to be burnt down and destroyed by the righteous anger and destructive power of its youth. And the killing of Charlie Kirk last week reminds us that the power of the American state exercises through threats and violence may well be met by counter-threats and violence deployed by its well-armed and weaponized citizenry. But as far as I am concerned, the main reason for the dark clouds that surround the hill that the United States stands on is its role in helping to build a world without rules. As the Financial Times editorial argued this week, the abandonment of the current administration's international rules-based order by the current administration has led to a new order, one based on transactions and unilateral force, which produces a kind of anarchy and a proliferation of violence. Yes?
It's this current administration that has taken in refugees from your native South Africa because of the collapse there.
Oh.
So they are doing a sterling work at keeping up order in these places.
You've touched a very, very sore point there. I grew up in South Africa under an authoritarian, racist regime. And the current regime in South Africa is not oppressing the people that I come from, the Afrikaners. So please, that's a ridiculous point. So it's not only the international community that is without a rules-based order. American economists and their followers, namely the Chicago boys, used Chile and the downfall of President Allende as the site of an experiment in economics that was to lead to an international economic system whose singular motive was a world without rules. In other words, the deregulation and detachment of global capitalism from democratic oversight and the unleashing of free market financial anarchy worldwide.
You say a world without rules, but if there wasn't freedom of navigation in the Gulf, through which 70%, you mentioned a world without rules, but if there wasn't freedom of navigation in the Gulf, through which 70% of the world's trade flows, and if there wasn't freedom of navigation in the South China Seas, we would all be much worse off. And those sea lanes are kept open because of the United States of America and because of American military might. And we all, the world system, the world rules, benefit from that.
That's a fair point, but it's obviously because of American vested interests that we have those, and it's imperial outreach that is we have that sort of monitoring of the South China Sea and so on. So I want to go back to my point about detachment of the economic system from democratic oversight. Global capitalism is now in the process of actually helping undermine one of the most important and powerful tools that the United States has to deploy influence around the world, and that is the United States dollar. And how is it doing that? Astonishingly, it's doing that by the administration's attack on the Federal Reserve, which has already led to a decrease in the value of the dollar over this last few months, but in my view will ultimately harm the role of the dollar in the global economy. But then there's something else. There's the tolerance for something called crypto. Yes, at the back.
The most exciting times in democracy have been when we have reduced poverty for people.
Reduced what?
Reduced poverty for people. We
Right.
have not detached democracy from people or the economy from people. People have enjoyed the benefits of neoliberalism.
Well,
do you agree?
No, I do not agree. So neoliberalism has led to a state of international, if you like, anarchy, financial anarchy, and that has encouraged levels of fraud and corruption that are unprecedented in history. It has empowered drug dealers and warlords across the world because of the deregulation of the movement of capital and so forth. But I want to come back to my point about the dollar and crypto. Crypto is a criminal currency promoted by libertarians of a pioneering frontier spirit whose global valuation has rocketed to $4 trillion. And even as it is clothed in the respectability of the US congressional and presidential approval, it is actually beginning to undermine the use of the dollar. And that is not just my view, but the view of, for example, Professor Ken Rogoff. And one of the leaders of one of the people looting the Bitcoin system is none other than the President of the United States. Trump Media and Technology Group Corporation, the firm behind Truth Social, has acquired about $2 billion in Bitcoin and related securities as part of the previously announced plan to become a crypto treasury company. The point of the matter is that crypto is not money, and it's not even a currency. It's a commodity that has no value whatsoever, but is used for purely speculative and criminal purposes. And the President of the United States is promoting this currency. And that is what is going to undermine the value of the dollar, and with the undermining the value of the dollar, undermine the value of the American economy. It is an incredibly dangerous strategy, and it's a reckless and criminal strategy, in my view.
Is it really the case that debating a particular aspect of American present economic policy is relevant to this motion? Because I would argue that it is not. The shining city on a hill was from the 17th century, and should we not be re-engaging with what that meant for freedom then, and whether that is either valid now or not, rather than getting into these runes of capitalism versus Marxist economics?
That's not where I've been going. So I'm merely trying to make the point, which I know is difficult for you to face, which is that the United States is weakened, is being weakened, very deliberately weakened by this president. It is a tawdry state that is, in my view, in the progress of failure. And if you can't face that, if you find that difficult to accept, that's not my problem, that's your problem. The United States is so weak that it has outsourced its foreign policy making to Mossad. We now have a situation of Israel first, not America first. And those are not my words, those are the words of Tucker Carlson. I've made my point, Chair, and I would like to stop there, but I would like to say that I think it's a frightening prospect that the United States is in a state of failure, and that it's a frightening prospect that we are not facing up to that reality. Thank you very much.
We have heard 4 very powerful speeches. Whether the ships have been sailing in quite the same direction is going to be a matter for you, but it is now your opportunity to speak in favour or in opposition to the motion before the final 2 guest speakers close the debate. I would like it to be balanced, so if somebody who wishes to speak in favour of the motion would indicate. And then we'll do it in turn.
The motion is that America is still a shining city on a hill, not whether it has always been, in all its forms, in all its ways. This is a nation that has in its constitution, or the Declaration of Independence, I can't remember, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We should honour that. That is to be cherished. Is that in China's constitution? Is that Russia's constitution? We're blessed in this country without a constitution. But even so, the Americans should be cherished for that heroism. Also, America's a nation in turmoil. America isn't going, we're fine. They're not complacent. They're anxious. They're desperate. They're permanently trying to improve their perfect union. Are Are the Chinese youth of today talking about their constitution, struggling with their future, raging against their president? Are the young people of Russia doing the same? Do we hand over freedom to people that won't discuss anything? Honestly, it's absurd. America is deeply flawed, but I'd hand over my freedom to them any day of the week.
Real passion. Somebody in opposition?
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to bring it very much down from the massive overarching politics that everyone's been talking about to the baseline of the American people, who I think we can all agree are kind of the base of what is the American dream and the American ideal. So I'm just going to talk a couple of figures at you briefly, but let's just take the Gini coefficient, which is an excellent, not perfect, but an excellent model of inequality based on gender, GDP per capita, and a few other things. Let's just put it this way. The US Gini coefficient, which measures the combined inequality of several different factors, was higher in 1993 than it was in both 2010 and 2021. Going down in the equality then. I'm not doing a speech, so sorry. Let's talk about the baseline of American health, which we all love to talk about as we have the lovely NHS. But let's talk about the 1,400 cases of measles that as of August this year were occurring in the United States when the disease was declared eradicated in 2001. Do you think those children dying of measles, largely because of the massive anti-vax movement that has been massively agreed with by many politicians of many different American politics, do you think that they would agree that America is still a shining city on a hill for them? I don't think so. Let's go even further into that. The average cost of an American stay in hospital for one day, I don't think anyone knows exactly what it is. It is over $3,000 for a single day in hospital. A single day. Just recently, Donald Trump allowed a bill, or encouraged a bill, I don't exactly know what the words are, but encouraged a bill that calls for the imprisonment of someone who burns the American flag. This is in direct violation of the First Amendment, which our dear friend Mr. Franklin co-signed. I would also like to say that a lot of the people tonight have talked about the aspirations of America, where it will be in the future, where it's been trying to get, and the people who want to get it there. But aspirations are shaped by lagging narratives, not the actual realities of a country that people live in. And I think Reagan applauded the new patriotism in his speech about a shining city on the hill, but he said it wouldn't count for much unless it was grounded in thoughtfulness and knowledge. And I don't see much of either of those in the US today. This page...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to our speakers. I would like to thank the previous speaker for bringing up the concept of the American dream and American inequality. I stand before you a product of the American dream. My parents were divorced very young. I never knew my biological father. My mom cleans houses. My dad spent most of my childhood in prison, where he remains to this day. I took out student loans to fund my education myself, my undergraduate, where I studied economics and learned a great deal about the Gini coefficient and the inequality that faces my nation and so many others. But I stand here a beneficiary of that inequality. I grew up on food stamps, was homeless for several periods, sleeping in my car in the Walmart parking lot, going around. And now I have the benefit of having attended, paid for with loans I got from my government, one of the top schools in the world to study law, and I now work for one of the most powerful law firms in the world, and I get to live here. I came from the bottom level to the very top, and that is a product of my nation, of which I am proud to be a member. And whenever I've told this story in bars, to people that I've met in pubs here, there's a word that I go back to that I was told by a member of, based on his accent, a very high British class, and he described my life story as far-fetched. But in America, it is anything but. And to me, my nation, even though I chose to leave it and come here, even though I've faced health hardships and troubles, America is still a place where if you work hard enough, you can get to the very top. Whether you're a foreigner like Elon Musk or born of low birth and come home from the hospital to sleep in a sock drawer like I did, America is still that shining city on the hill for so many millions of us that call it our home.
How powerful is that? One in opposition? We'll do two more, so you'll get a chance.
Right, so I'll just give you some facts, because a lot of this has been very political and nuanced and nonsense. So America thinks it's first in everything, which is clearly not true. It's 46th in life expectancy. Press freedom, it's 42nd. Healthcare, 30th. Education, 26th. Happiness, 23rd. Freedom, although I don't know how they measure that, 17th. What America is first in: military spending, number of billionaires, incarceration, bankruptcy filings, medical debt, and gun deaths. So, the question I have for the proposition is, what drugs are you smoking and can I have some?
Somebody who wishes to propose the motion? One more we can have. Oh, come on. Yes, thank you very much.
I want to ground you in the motion. This House believes that America, it says American here, but America is still a shining city on a hill. This is not a debate about economics or base politics. It is a philosophical proposition, and it is a philosophical aspiration, and we should address it in philosophical and spiritual ways, granted that we are in a church. What is a shining city on a hill? Well, this takes us back to the Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, not the one that Netanyahu's wanting to build in Gaza, but the one in the Bible. It is about trying to do what's right and lifting everybody up. It is giving people a vision. And does America still give people a vision around the world? Well, the answer to that, to those naysayers, is that even a shining city might eventually face storm clouds that mask its ability. But the reality is that the American dream is what motivates Americans. It might cause some of the divergence and some of the inequalities. But remember this: equality is not about equality of outcome. It is about equality of opportunity and giving everyone the opportunity to better themselves. And that is possible in America. It used to be more possible here than it is today. And I would say that it is Britain that has lost its position as a shining city on a hill, not America. So remember this: where else in the world can a lowly born person aspire to reach the pinnacle? And it is not necessary that you actually achieve it, but that you have the ability to aspire, and that your aspiration is not viewed as unacceptable, whether you achieve it or not. And therefore, I say, The motion should be supported. Thank you.
One more in opposition. One more in opposition.
First, I'd like to thank all of the people that have spoken in this fantastic institution, and to acknowledge the breadth and depth and the value of both these arguments, of both the opposition and the support for the proposition. I don't think that we should look at America and say that all things are good or all things are bad. I think we're on a journey. I think they're on a journey. When we think of a shining light, we have to ask ourselves, shining light for whom? Whose hill? And who is benefiting from that? And I think we have stories where individually, there are individuals have prospered. My accent, I'm originally Canadian, but I've made Britain my home by choice. Look at some of the stories of other countries outside of Britain, including Canada, and a very close ally to America, Canadians, and some of the turning against, the challenging economically. And I think we can't separate the religion, the politics, and the economics of the situation, because it is an emotional debate. And we find that I actually love many things about America, but I question, if we look at the proposition, is it still the shining light? Is it still adhering to that value, that system that it had? And the evidence that we're looking at now is when you have a shortage of wealth and a shortage of things, what happens is people seek to compete. And I'm starting to see, and this isn't unique to America, this is a global phenomenon, we're starting to compete for resources. We've gone through some very good times, and I think those times are challenging now. Can America continue to be the shining light? Can it pull itself together? There's divisiveness I'm seeing in the politics. People are moving to I have cousins and family that are American, and they won't talk to each other because some are Republicans, they literally will not talk to them. That is not a way of joining and benefiting from the shining light. We've talked about some of the international institutions that have been built. If we're not engaging in multilateral discussions and we're becoming very self-centered individual, I'm concerned. So I argue against the motion that it is still the shining light. I think it still has the possibility to be, but there has to be some changes. I'm concerned. I'm concerned for this country, but we're talking about America. I'm concerned, and I'm hoping with some challenge and some new thinking, and I don't fully agree with some of what's happening with the Trump administration, but I think you have to challenge ideas to come up with something new, and we're on that journey. So I look forward to what that will become, but right now I don't support the proposition.
I am extremely grateful for the passionate and helpful contributions that have been made from the House. I now call upon Lord Hannan of Kingsclere to respond finally in support of the motion.
In this, his tercentenary year in this place, I fancy we feel the ghost of Benjamin Franklin stirring. Listen, and you may hear the creak as he turns the heavy wooden screw of the printing device, the chink as he puts the backward typeface in, the whisper as the still wet paper is laid out. He was invoked by Father Marcus, and I'm going to disturb his shade further, because Benjamin Franklin, who spent almost as much time here as in Pennsylvania, spent most of his life thinking of himself as a Brit. And when he joined the revolution, did so in the spirit of a man who believed that he was fighting for the rights he had always assumed to be his birthright as an Englishman. It made him a very late and reluctant convert to the cause. As late as 1773, he was writing to the Patriot leaders as follows: "Remember withal that this Protestant country, our mother, is worth saving, and that her weight in the scales of Europe may depend upon our union with her. This, in other words, was not a frothing enthusiast. He went in the end, to the patriot cause, as the prayer book says, of matrimony reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, as a scientist should, in a spirit of empiricism, caution, and reason. And it is in that spirit that I want us to address the motion before us tonight. No one is claiming that the United States is perfect. Perfection, my friends, is not for this life. The world is gross and sublunary. And I think that was understood when the image of the city on the hill was first proposed. A city on a hill is seen from a distance. We don't get close up and observe the cracked paving stones or the people tipping their chamber pots from the window. Or to update the metaphor, we don't see the traffic fumes and hear the noise. Rather, we detect the hum of the enterprise of an impatient people. A people whose bold and spirited restlessness has given them not only drive-through Dunkin' Donuts, but drive-through weddings. A spirit that took their flag to the moon and will take it to Mars. We see the skyscrapers of a people who couldn't wait to shake the dust of Europe from their feet in order to build something better. And I want us to debate this motion with a sense of due perspective, to judge the United States as we would any other country, rather than holding it to an impossible standard. Now, my friend Peter Oborne, who I much admire, said in quite strong language, it's a nation of torture chambers and tyranny. And then he spoke about all the places where it was seen that way, all these wonderful places which are, of course, paragons of liberal democracy. He mentioned Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Iraq. Now, again, apply a little sense of perspective. Do you see the people of Pittsburgh queuing up to get into Pakistan, saying we are escaping the torture chambers and the tyrannical government? Like Peter, I count myself a friend of the imprisoned former leader of Pakistan, Imran Khan. I was organizing meetings for him while he was incarcerated. I don't think that Kamala Harris needs to worry about being held in solitary confinement for having lost an election. Keep a sense of perspective about which country people are wanting to move to. And may I say, about the best measure of whether a country, where a country ranks, never mind the popular internet meme that we just had read out in the floor debate. The most basic measure is the in queue longer than the out queue? Yes, it is true the United States has a problem with immigration. That's a good problem to have, right? I'll show you a country which has an immigration problem, and I'm showing you a country that you really don't want to live in. Although, that said, Mr. Chairman, we in this country seem simultaneously to have an immigration and an immigration crisis. We've somehow managed to arrange our affairs so that we're getting rid of all our millionaires and replacing them with family dependents who go straight on to welfare. So, but nonetheless, I ask you to show a little bit of fair-mindedness. A nation that turns a dream of freedom into a functioning nation-state, that attracts tens of millions of people from every continent and every archipelago, may not be perfect, but surely they are drawn by that vision. And that vision acts as a corrective. Yes, of course, the United States has its sins and errors, as every country does. It can behave selfishly and sordidly, as every country can. More usually, I have to say, its errors are those of exuberance. Right? I was, like Peter, I was one of the handful of conservatives in this country who opposed the Iraq War at the time. But that was, as so often, an error of overconfidence, rather than an act of meanness. And I think that is, if you like, still driven. It's the flip side of the impatience and the boldness and the spiritedness. And that vision, that founding vision contained in the foundational documents, inspires people to do better. When Martin Luther King was arguing against one of the more obvious failures of the American Republic, he didn't do so by rooting his language in generalities or even in biblical truths, but by constantly referring back to the founding documents to which he referred as a promissory note. His argument all the way through was this republic is failing to live up to its ideals. He kept on peppering his speeches with references to all men being created equal. You could not make that argument in Russia or in China or even in Iraq or Iran or Pakistan. So to say that a country is falling short of its ideals is simply to admit that it has those ideals and that those ideals are worth aspiring to. Yes, of course.
It's very kind of you. I think you're misrepresenting me a little bit on Iran and Pakistan. And the point I was making was that US military or military intervention ended the civilian administration in Pakistan and replaced it by a military dictatorship. Likewise, in Iran, you had a nascent liberal democracy, and the CIA, backed by MI6, smashed it. That is the point I was making. And
as I say, errors of exuberance. But you know, given that we saved the world first from the Nazi tyranny and then from the communist tyranny, I will take the package and live in a free country where we can have debates like this, because imagine that the Second World War or the Cold War had ended differently. We would not be having these arguments about whether the coup in Iran was really our fault. And I just want to go back to this point of, if there is a measure by which you can be corrected, if you are falling short of your own ideals, then let's apply that to the present day. Right? This is, by the way, a very old debate, just like everyone else, inspired by the beauty of our place. I'm sure a lot of you will recall the scene in The Brothers Karamazov, where there's the argument about how can a just God permit all these horrors? How can an all-powerful and beneficent deity permit the suffering of a child? And the answer that's given in that scene in the Optina monastery is, well, but how can you say that these are terrible things, other than by reference to some absolute morality? How can you say that the suffering child is a bad thing, or that these other things are evil, without assuming some kind of moral code? By the way, the debate in the Optina monastery in the book was answered in the most grisly way in real life, because that was the headquarters of the Soviet secret police when they made the decision to massacre the thousands of Polish army officers, priests, and intellectuals who'd been captured in 1940. The decision to kill people in the Katyn massacre was made in that Optina monastery. That's what happens when you edit out all morality and judge human life purely in utilitarian terms. But let's allow the current administration the same courtesy of being judged with perspective, compared to other places, against that high standard set in the old courthouse in Philadelphia. As James says, I'm not a fan of the steel-manned orange man. I think his character flaws make him unfit for office. I think his attitude to democracy debases the republic. And yet, the guardrails have held. Unlike the Putins of this world, or the Xis, or even the Erdogans, he can't just carry on, much as he would like to, and award himself a third term. He can't strike down every law that he finds inconvenient, as he found just now on the tariff laws. Yes, this will be my last.
He can, because he has a majority on the Supreme Court, and that is what the Supreme Court has been obliging him at every level, at every challenge there is to the
forgive me, but the most recent test of this was his, I think, preposterous claim that the tariffs that he was imposing were a national emergency, and the court, Republican appointed, said, no, it's plainly not. In other words, the system still works, not because it's perfect, but because it is better than most of the alternatives, and we should be grown up to realize that in an imperfect world, we sometimes have to choose the lesser evil. Let me finish, because I'm getting signs on timing. Let me finish with why I think this is. What was decided in that little secular miracle that happened in Philadelphia? What was decided was to create a system of government where power was dispersed, devolved, and democratized, where the people in charge were constantly looking over their shoulder at their electorates, and where decisions were taken as closely as possible to the people that they affect. And that, my friends, has elevated and ennobled the human species. So I want to finish where Peter left us, actually, in August 1941, on the decks of HMS Prince of Wales when the Atlantic Charter was signed. It was the day that Franklin Roosevelt made the longest walk of his presidency. In a way that would nowadays be unimaginable, the media of that time had conspired to hide the fact of the president's polio from the public. Every photograph showed him seated or standing unaided. But that day, on his way to see Winston Churchill, he was determined to walk. And so with his son on one side and a naval officer on the other, he made his slow way across the deck as the band struck up the Stars and Stripes Forever. And what followed was the greatest possible visual realization of what binds the English-speaking peoples together. It happened to be a Sunday morning. And so the crews of the two vessels, USS Augusta and HMS Prince of Wales, were mustered for a joint religious service. Churchill had chosen every detail personally and meticulously, down to the hymns, down to the reading that the chaplain gave from the pulpit on the deck. It came from the book of Joshua. As I was with Moses, so shall I be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Be strong and of good courage. And afterwards, exultantly, Churchill burst out the same language, the same hymns, the same ideals. And I want you to think, my friends, of what those ideals were. We mean by those same ideals not just generally that we're the good guys. We mean free speech and uncensored newspapers. We mean regular elections and representative government. We mean equality between men and women and equality before the law. We mean habeas corpus and jury trials. We mean all the things that make modern life rational and comfortable and pleasant. And although we now call them universal values, do you know what? We are being polite. These are overwhelmingly values that were determined and then exported in the language in which you are now listening to my words. If we had lost either the Second World War or the Cold War, there would be nothing universal about them then. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, we in this country, we of all people, should say with voice and with heart, God bless America.
Lord Hannan required a few extra seconds there. I now call upon Pete Hitchens to respond finally in opposition to the motion.
Good evening. As this is the house of God, I will begin with prayer, which you may all join in with or not, as the case may be, and it's very simple. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer, through Jesus Christ our Lord. I was in danger of being intoxicated by the exuberance of Lord Hannan's verbosity, but I hope I've now brought a certain sepulchral calm to the room. I wanted to address this slightly more seriously. He would be amused, I hope, to read the chapter on the Atlantic Charter meeting in my excellent book, unavailable at all leading booksellers, The Phony Victory, which describes the almost total uselessness to Britain of that meeting and the way in which Roosevelt treated Churchill with contempt and ignored all his requests, which I think should be more widely known. But that's for another moment in what I have to say here. The issue of whether America is a shining city on a hill is separate from so many other issues. As it was pointed out at the beginning, I have written and on many occasions said very many complimentary things about the United States, where I lived with joy and delight for 2 extraordinary years of my life and found it a place of both great beauty and inspiration, and somewhere from which I've learned a great deal. The first time I ever visited the United States in 1977, when I came home, I could not sleep for 3 weeks because I'd been so completely astonished by the difference between what I had been told and what I had been found. I say this because I really do not want anybody to think that I'm motivated by anti-Americanism, a phrase often used by people who criticize the United States. My point this evening is very simple. The United States is just another country. It's not Britain. It's not our special friend. It doesn't have any particular regard for us, nor is it elevated to the state of some extraordinary religious purity which enables it to stand above everybody else and to tell everybody else what to do. I jolly well hope that all American cities are on hills at the moment, because what else will enable the wind to blow away the very strong smell of marijuana? Returning to the distant history, it has been mentioned about the original statement that America should be a city on the hill, and Pastor Winthrop actually speaking to his congregation in Southampton, that unromantic place. Before I speak as a person associated with Portsmouth, in Southampton, that unromantic place, warning them that their conduct in this new colony and in this new world would be very sternly judged by those who didn't agree with them. That was the purpose of his speech, which was thereafter forgotten by almost everybody for about 200 years, until the United States had begun to do a number of things. The first thing that it had done is that it had come into existence. It didn't come into existence because of good old Ben Franklin plotting away revolutionarily here. It came into existence because the French autocracy decided to bankrupt itself in a revenge against Britain for its victory in the 7 Years' War, and to bankrupt itself in financing this bunch of not particularly savory rebels based in the top right-hand corner of what is now the United States. And that's what they did. There used to be a joke around the time of the Iraq War that you were supposed to Google French military victories, and the word would come back that there weren't any. The most significant French military victory in the history of the world, it was at Yorktown in 1781, achieved by Rochambeau and the Comte de Grasse, who defeated the British with a small amount of assistance from some Americans. When Cornwallis surrendered, he tried to surrender to the French. And they shrugged in that French way of theirs and said, sorry, not us, you have to surrender to these guys over here. And Cornwallis said, well, they didn't beat us, it doesn't matter, you have to surrender to them. And that is the beginning of this great myth of the city on the hill and the Great Republic. America was also a very revolutionary country. The reason why Canada exists, the reason why thousands of people trooped further north into the colder and bleaker parts of the continent, was because anyone who showed any loyalty to Anglican Christianity or to King George was tarred and feathered, shouted down, persecuted, driven from their homes by rough music. There was serious persecution of conservative persons in the new revolutionary United States. It wasn't a pretty sight, which is probably why Samuel Johnson, one of our greatest thinkers and writers, wrote a pamphlet in 1775 called, interestingly enough, Taxation, No Tyranny, which wouldn't go down very well now. And he jeered, memorably, in a phrase which has gone down through the centuries, how is it, and forgive the language here, but it is his, how is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes? Because what America immediately became was a country of slavery. And if you doubt any of this, one of the greatest speeches ever made in the history of the world was made by Abraham Lincoln, the second inaugural address. And I'm going to quote from it here because it states something very important about the lack of biblical understanding and the lack of city-on-the-hillness among Americans at that stage in their history. He said of the two sides of the American Civil War, both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not that we be not judged. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. One could go on, and I don't know how much time I have left. I think I have. Wonderful. One could go on about American exceptionalism and the idea that in some way America had a particular mission in the world, which happened to come into the minds of Americans round about the time that they were stealing a large chunk of Mexico from the Mexicans, and also engaged in a major boundary dispute about Oregon with this country. Sorry, did you want to say something? this is also true. All kinds of people have done all kinds of things in Mexico, often the Germans, but it's not really the point, is it? Let me continue just as I was trying to do. So here we have a country. We have a country, and it's a country which has not always been terrifically friendly to this one. So in 1918, after we'd gone bankrupt fighting a mad war against Germany on behalf of the Russians, Woodrow Wilson, the then President of the United States, had been backing what he called the Big Navy Act, of which he said, and this is very specific, let us build a navy bigger than Britain's and do what we please. He resolved to build incomparably the greatest navy in the world, aiming to make the US Navy equal to any two others in the world. And during his sea voyage to London in 1918, for a dinner at Buckingham Palace, which I shall refer to in a moment if there's time, Wilson told his aides that he would no longer accept Britain's total dominance at sea. If Britain did not come to terms over this, he said, America would build the biggest navy in the world, matching theirs and exceeding it, and if they would not limit it, there would come another and more terrible and bloody war, and England would be wiped off the face of the map. Shortly afterwards, speaking at Buckingham Palace, not Windsor Castle, the same Woodrow Wilson said, you must not speak of us who come over here as cousins, still less as brothers. We're neither. And I think we should remember all this. We should also remember my good friend Christopher Mayer, who was Her Majesty's ambassador to the United States, who was ordered, because of our pathetic state in the world, to, in the words of Jonathan Powell, and I won't quote them completely, to get as far up the colon of the United States and stay there, the White House. So basically the British Embassy in Washington became then, and as far as I can see has probably been since, a sort of human colonoscopy expedition, which has been dedicated to supporting almost every serious mistake, as Lord Hannan refers to them, made by the United States in recent years. He's so kind. The Iraq War was an era of overconfidence. Well, do you know, I think, Lord Hannan, that's probably almost exactly what Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin could be accused of committing in Ukraine. And then you had also another era of exuberance. But these things, nonetheless, eras as they were, exuberant as they may have been, led and continue to lead to the smashing of people's homes, to the killing of husbands, fathers, and brothers and sons in very large numbers, and to the spreading of conflict about the world. The United States has many virtues. I am prepared to sing them at almost any time. But it is absurd to treat it as some kind of ideal state. In fact, the whole enterprise of creating ideal states upon the planet, the whole idea that we can have New Jerusalems and heavens on earth, has been the source of almost all the worst evils that have ever taken place, whether in China, whether in the Soviet Union, or whether now in the countries laid waste by foolish and unnecessary American policies, very often driven by foolish idealism rather than by a sensible desire to protect people in their homes and ensure that we all live safely under our own vine and under our own fig tree, where we should. Thank you.
My professional background would have allowed you all to retire and consider your verdicts at great length, possibly spending hours or days or weeks deliberating this difficult question. However, I put all that to one side. The question is that this House believes that America is still a shining city on the hill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, a vote by hands. As many as are of that opinion, I'm not listening to volume, as many are of that opinion, please show their hands. This is those who are in support of the motion. in case you didn't catch it. Of the contrary, show hands. No abstentions this time. I think you've done it now. You're all right. So we've now got to do some maths. Math. Yes, you're quite right. I'm not indicating any bias one way or the other. Although I bitterly regret the death of the late Tom Lehrer.
The nose to the left, 146.
The eyes to the right, 96. The nose to the left, 146. The nose have it. The nose have it. Unlock. Could I, on behalf of everyone, thank the speakers, both the speakers in the main and those who've spoken from the floor, for their contributions to a most entertaining and interesting debate. Thank you very much.
And may I just echo the thanks of Sir Brian Leveson to the speakers, the guest speakers and those who spoke at the floor, and also to Sir Brian for his chairing of this debate. And may I invite you to continue to enjoy the evening as the bar will be open.